It started like any other Friday. I was rushing around the kitchen, cleaning up after lunch when Lucas burst through the front door, his school backpack sliding off his shoulder and hitting the floor with a thud. His face was flushed with excitement, the kind of look he got when he'd been planning something all day. "Mom, can I sleep over at Matthew's house tonight? Please?" The words tumbled out before he'd even caught his breath properly. I paused, my hand still holding the dish towel. Matthew was a boy from his class, someone Lucas had mentioned a few times recently. They'd been partnered up for a science project and seemed to get along well. But I'd never met his parents, never been to their house, never even had a proper conversation with them beyond brief hellos at school pickup. "I don't know, sweetheart," I said slowly. "I've never really talked to Matthew's mom and dad." Lucas's face fell immediately. "But Mom, Matthew already asked his parents and they said yes. He's so excited. We're going to play video games and watch movies, and his mom said we could make popcorn and stay up late." There was something tugging at my chest, a small, uncomfortable feeling that I couldn't quite name. It wasn't anything specific about Matthew or his family. The few times I'd seen his mother at school events, she seemed nice enough. Friendly smile, always dressed neatly, the kind of woman who volunteered for bake sales and helped with field trips. His father looked ordinary too, just another dad in khakis and polo shirts dropping his kid off in the morning. But Lucas had never done a sleepover before, not with anyone outside our immediate family. The thought of him spending the night somewhere I didn't really know made my stomach twist a little. What if he got homesick? What if he couldn't sleep? What if something happened? "Come on, Mom," Lucas pleaded, sensing my hesitation. "I'm 10 years old. I'm not a baby anymore." He was right, of course. 10 years old was plenty old enough for sleepovers. I remembered being his age and begging my own mother for the same thing. I thought about all the parenting articles I'd read about not being too overprotective, about letting kids develop independence and social skills. Maybe I was just being paranoid. I looked at Lucas standing there, his eyes wide with hope, already mentally planning his evening of freedom. His backpack was still on the floor where he'd dropped it, but I could see he'd been thinking about this all day, probably discussing it with Matthew during lunch, making plans, building up excitement. "Please, Mom," he asked again, his voice softer now. "Matthew's house is really nice. It's just a few streets over from here. And his mom said she'd give you her phone number so you could call if you wanted to check on me." That did sound reasonable, and it would only be for one night. Lucas was a good kid, responsible for his age. He knew our rules about behavior and manners. Maybe it was time I stopped treating him like a little boy and started trusting him to handle new experiences. But that feeling in my chest wouldn't go away. It was like a small voice whispering that something wasn't right, though I couldn't figure out what. Everything about the situation seemed perfectly normal. A 10-year-old boy wanting to spend the night at a friend's house. Parents who seemed decent and responsible. A safe neighborhood just a few minutes from our own. I found myself staring at Lucas, weighing my instincts against what seemed logical. He'd packed his overnight bag before I'd even said yes, I realized. It was sitting by the stairs, stuffed with pajamas and a toothbrush, and probably half his toy collection. "Okay," I heard myself saying, "but I want to talk to Matthew's mother first, and you call me if anything feels wrong, or if you want to come home, no matter what time it is." Lucas's face lit up like Christmas morning. He threw his arms around my waist, squeezing tight. "Thank you, Mom. This is going to be so awesome." As I watched him grab his bag and head for the door, chattering excitedly about all the things he and Matthew were going to do, that little voice in my head grew a bit louder. But I pushed it down, telling myself I was just being a nervous mother. Sometimes you have to let your kids grow up, even when every instinct tells you to keep them close. I'd driven Lucas to Matthew's house around 7 that evening. The place looked exactly like what you'd expect in our neighborhood. A 2-story colonial with a small front yard, flower beds along the walkway, and a basketball hoop in the driveway. Matthew's mother, Sarah, met us at the door wearing jeans and a sweater, her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked tired but smiled warmly as Lucas bounded past her into the house. "Thanks for letting him come over," she said, handing me a piece of paper with her cell phone number written on it. "They're so excited about this sleepover. Matthew's been talking about it all week." I could hear the boys laughing somewhere inside the house, already deep into whatever adventure they'd planned. Sarah seemed nice enough. asking if Lucas had any food allergies or bedtime routines she should know about. Everything felt normal, routine, the kind of conversation parents have every day. But as I walked back to my car, that uneasy feeling crept back in. I sat in the driveway for a few minutes, staring at the house, trying to figure out what was bothering me. Maybe it was just first-time sleepover nerves. Maybe every parent felt this way the first time they left their child somewhere overnight. The rest of the evening dragged by. I tried reading a book, flipping through TV channels, even starting some laundry just to keep busy. But my mind kept wandering back to Lucas. I found myself checking my phone every few minutes, though I knew it was too early to call. I'd told Sarah I might check in around bedtime, but I didn't want to seem like the paranoid mother who couldn't let her kid have one night of independence. By 11 o'clock, I was exhausted from worrying about nothing. I decided to take a hot bath and try to relax. Lucas was fine. He was having fun with his friend, probably eating too much junk food and staying up too late. Exactly what sleepovers were supposed to be about. I needed to trust that I'd raised him well enough to handle himself for one night. I'd just fallen asleep when my phone started ringing. The sound cut through my dreams like a knife, and I jerked awake, my heart already pounding before I was fully conscious. The clock on my nightstand glowed 2:17 in red numbers. Nobody calls at 2:17 in the morning unless something's wrong. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, squinting at the screen. Lucas. My hands were shaking as I swiped to answer. Lucas? Honey, what's wrong? At first, all I could hear was crying. Not just regular crying, but the kind of sobbing that comes from deep fear. The sound Lucas used to make as a toddler when he'd had a nightmare. My blood turned to ice. Mom? His voice was barely a whisper, broken up by gasps and hiccups. Mom, please come get me. I'm so scared. I don't want to be here anymore. I was already throwing off my covers, reaching for clothes. What happened, baby? Are you hurt? The grown-ups left, he whispered, and I could hear him trying to control his breathing. Matthew's mom and dad went out somewhere and they left us with his big brother. But his brother has friends over and they're being really mean to us. My heart was racing so fast I could barely think straight. What do you mean mean? What are they doing? They were drinking beer and being really loud, Lucas said, his voice getting smaller. And then they started playing this game where they locked me and Matthew in the closet and wouldn't let us out. Matthew started crying because he was scared, and his brother got really mad and hit him. He hit him hard, Mom. I was pulling on jeans and a t-shirt with one hand, holding the phone with the other. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get dressed. Where are you now, Lucas? I'm hiding in the laundry room. I found a phone in here and I remembered your number. I'm so scared, Mom. What if they find me? What if they hurt me like they hurt Matthew? Listen to me very carefully, I said, trying to keep my voice calm, even though my heart felt like it was going to explode. I'm coming to get you right now, okay? And I'm calling the police. Just stay where you are and be as quiet as you can. Please hurry, Mom. I can hear them looking for us. They keep yelling and laughing, and I think they're drunk. I'm already in the car, baby. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Just stay on the phone with me. But as I backed out of my driveway, fumbling to dial 911 with my other hand, I realized 15 minutes might be too long. I've never driven so fast in my life. Every traffic light felt like an eternity. Every stop sign an impossible obstacle. I had Lucas on speakerphone in one hand, and my other phone pressed to my ear, talking to the 911 dispatcher who was trying to get details while staying calm and professional. Ma'am, I need you to slow down and tell me exactly what your son told you, the dispatcher said in that steady voice they're trained to use. My 10-year-old is hiding in a house where teenagers are drinking and abusing him and his friend, I said, probably talking too fast. The parents left these kids alone with a 17-year-old who has friends over. They've been locking the children in closets and hitting them. We have units being dispatched to the address now. Are you able to stay on the line with your son? On the other phone, I could hear Lucas breathing heavily, occasionally sniffling, but trying to be brave. Every few seconds he'd whisper something like, I think they're getting closer, or I can hear them in the hallway. Lucas, are you still there, baby? I'm here, Mom, but I think they know I'm not in the closet anymore. They keep opening doors and yelling for us to come out. The dispatcher heard this and immediately radioed for the units to expedite. I could hear the professional concern creeping into her voice now. Ma'am, how far are you from the location? Maybe 5 more minutes, I said, taking a corner too fast and not caring. Please tell me the police are almost there. They should be arriving any moment now. But 5 minutes felt like 5 hours. I kept imagining all the horrible things that could happen in 5 minutes. What if those teenagers found Lucas in the laundry room? What if they hurt him? What if Matthew was getting beaten up while my son was forced to watch? What if I was too late? Mom, I hear sirens, Lucas suddenly whispered, his voice filled with relief. I think the police are here. I could hear them too now, getting closer to the neighborhood. Red and blue lights were already reflecting off the houses as I turned onto Matthews Street. There were 2 police cars pulled up outside the Colonial House, their lights flashing, and I could see officers walking quickly toward the front door. I parked crooked against the curb and ran toward the house, but one of the officers stopped me before I could get to the front door. Ma'am, are you the mother who called this in? Yes, my son is in there. Is he okay? Did you get him out? We just got here, ma'am. My partner is inside now. I need you to stay out here while we secure the scene, but I promise you we'll have your boy out in just a few minutes. Standing on that sidewalk was torture. I could hear voices from inside the house, some of them young and belligerent, others calm and authoritative. I strained to hear Lucas's voice among them but couldn't make out individual words. Another police car pulled up, then an ambulance, which made my heart stop all over again. Is someone hurt? I asked the officer standing with me. Just a precaution, ma'am. We always call medical when children are involved in these situations. I was pacing back and forth on the sidewalk, my arms wrapped around myself, when the front door opened and I saw Lucas running toward me. His face was streaked with tears, and he looked smaller somehow, but he was running on his own 2 feet, and that was all that mattered. He crashed into my arms so hard we both almost fell over. I dropped to my knees on the sidewalk and held him as tight as I could, feeling his whole body shaking against mine. I was so scared, Mom, he kept saying over and over. I thought something really bad was going to happen. You're safe now, I whispered into his hair. I'm here. You're safe. I'm never letting you out of my sight again. Behind us, I could hear more officers arriving, and through the open front door, I could see several teenagers sitting on the couch looking sullen and worried. One of them was arguing with a police officer, claiming they weren't doing anything wrong. Another one was trying to explain something, talking fast and gesturing with his hands, but I didn't care about any of that right now. All that mattered was Lucas in my arms, breathing and safe and whole. The guilt was already starting to set in. I should have listened to that voice in my head, should have trusted my instincts instead of worrying about seeming overprotective, but that could wait. Right now, my son needed me, and I wasn't going anywhere. While I sat on the curb holding Lucas, trying to calm both of us down, I watched the police work. Officer Martinez, the one who'd been talking to me, came over with a notepad and crouched down to our level. I know this is hard, but I need to ask Lucas a few questions while everything is still fresh, he said gently. Is that okay? Lucas nodded, but pressed closer to me. His voice was still shaky as he told the officer about hiding in the laundry room, about finding the cordless phone on the washing machine, about hearing Matthew crying from somewhere else in the house. The big boys kept laughing when Matthew cried, Lucas said. They thought it was funny, and they kept saying we were babies and that we needed to toughen up. Officer Martinez wrote everything down carefully. Can you tell me how many older kids were there? Maybe 4 or 5? They were all bigger than us, and they smelled like my uncle does sometimes at Christmas dinner. Lucas looked up at me. You know, that smell? I knew. Alcohol. My stomach turned thinking about drunk teenagers terrorizing 2 10-year-olds. Another officer approached us. Ma'am, I'm Sergeant Williams. We've got the situation under control now. We found the other boy, Matthew, hiding under his bed upstairs. He's got some bruising on his arm and his face, but nothing that appears serious. The paramedics are checking him over now. Where are his parents? I asked. That's what we're trying to figure out. The older brother claims they just went out for dinner and should be back soon, but neighbors say they saw them leave around 6 o'clock with overnight bags. We're trying to reach them now. As if on cue, a car pulled up fast and crooked behind one of the police cars. A woman jumped out. Sarah, Matthew's mother, still wearing the same jeans and sweater from earlier. Her face was white with panic. What's happening? Is Matthew okay? She ran toward us, but another officer intercepted her. Behind her, a man got out of the driver's side. Matthew's father, I assumed. He looked confused and angry, the way people do when they're woken up or interrupted from something important. We were just at dinner with friends, Sarah was saying to the officers. We left Jake in charge. He's 17. He's responsible. What happened? I watched her face change as the officers explained the situation. First confusion, then disbelief, then horror. She kept shaking her head and saying, "That's not possible. Jake would never..." But I could see the reality sinking in as more details came out. The older brother, Jake, was brought out in handcuffs along with 3 of his friends. They all looked young and stupid and scared now. Nothing like the menacing figures Lucas had described. One of them was stumbling a little, and I could smell beer from where I was sitting 10 feet away. "We were just messing around," one of them said to his parents who'd just arrived. "We weren't really hurting them. It was just a game." "A game?" I found myself standing up, still holding Lucas. "Locking children in closets and hitting them is a game to you?" The kid looked away, suddenly very interested in his shoes. Sergeant Williams came back over to me. "Ma'am, we're going to need you and Lucas to come down to the station to give formal statements. Not tonight, but sometime this weekend. And we'll need to document any injuries or trauma." "What happens now?" I asked. "Child Protective Services has been notified. They'll investigate the living situation here. The older boys will be charged. Assault, child endangerment, providing alcohol to minors. Depending on what CPS finds, there could be charges against the parents too for neglect." I looked over at Sarah, who was crying now, as she talked to another officer. Her husband looked angry and was gesturing at Jake, probably asking how this could have happened. Part of me felt sorry for them. They'd trusted their older son to watch his little brother for one evening, the way millions of parents do. But another part of me was furious. How do you not know your 17-year-old well enough to predict this? "Mom, can we go home now?" Lucas asked quietly. "Yes, baby. We can go home." Officer Martinez handed me his card and explained about the follow-up procedures. There would be interviews, paperwork, possibly court appearances if the case went to trial. Lucas would probably need to talk to counselors and social workers. As we walked to our car, I saw Matthew being put in an ambulance. "Just as a precaution," the paramedic assured his mother. He looked so small on that stretcher, still in his Star Wars pajamas, with a bruise darkening on his cheek. Sarah tried to approach me as we were leaving. "I'm so sorry," she started to say, but I couldn't handle it right then. I needed to get Lucas home, needed to hold him in our own house where I knew he was safe. "We'll talk later," I told her, not unkindly, but firmly. The drive home was quiet. Lucas dozed off in the passenger seat, exhausted from fear and adrenaline. I kept one hand on his shoulder the whole way, needing the physical contact to reassure myself that he was really there, really okay. The next few days passed in a strange, suspended kind of time. Lucas didn't want to be alone, so he followed me around the house like a shadow. When I did laundry, he sat on the floor folding washcloths. When I made dinner, he stood beside me at the counter, not really helping, but just needing to be close. At night, he crawled into my bed without asking, and I didn't have the heart to send him back to his own room. The nightmares started on Sunday night. I'd wake up to Lucas thrashing beside me, whimpering in his sleep. When I'd shake him gently awake, he'd be covered in sweat and wouldn't remember what he'd been dreaming about, just that he'd been scared and couldn't get away from something. "It's okay," I'd whisper, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. "You're safe. We're at home. Nobody can hurt you here." But I wasn't sleeping much either. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept replaying that phone call, hearing his terrified voice whispering into the phone. I kept thinking about all the what-ifs. What if he hadn't found that phone in the laundry room? What if those teenagers had found him before the police arrived? What if I'd been 5 minutes later getting there? The guilt was eating me alive. I'd known something was wrong. I'd felt it in my gut from the moment Lucas asked to go to that sleepover, and I'd ignored it. I'd let social pressure and parenting magazines convince me to override my instincts, and my son had paid the price. On Monday morning, Lucas didn't want to go to school. He said his stomach hurt, and when I took his temperature it was normal, but he looked pale and tired. "What if the kids at school know what happened?" he asked. "What if they think I'm a baby for calling you?" "You're not a baby," I told him firmly. "You're brave. You protected yourself and Matthew by calling for help. That's what smart, brave people do." But he stayed home anyway. I called in sick to work, and we spent the day on the couch watching cartoons and eating cereal straight from the box. It felt like we were both recovering from something, though I wasn't sure what to call it. Detective Collins called that afternoon to set up a time for Lucas to give his statement. She was gentle and patient when she talked to him on the phone, explaining that he'd done the right thing and that his information would help make sure other kids didn't get hurt the same way. "Will I have to see those big boys again?" Lucas asked me after hanging up. "I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe. But if you do, there will be lots of grown-ups there to protect you, and they can't hurt you anymore." That evening, my sister called. She'd heard about what happened through the neighborhood grapevine and wanted to check on us. "I can't believe you're blaming yourself for this," she said when I told her how guilty I felt. "You couldn't have known those parents would leave their kids with someone so irresponsible." "But I had a feeling," I said. "I knew something wasn't right, and I ignored it. Honey, every parent gets nervous about first sleepovers. That doesn't mean you're psychic." Maybe she was right, but it didn't make the guilt any easier to carry. I kept thinking about all the times I'd second-guessed my parenting instincts, all the moments I'd chosen to be the cool mom instead of the cautious one. On Wednesday, we went to see Dr. Sarah Chen, a child psychologist who specialized in trauma. Her office was warm and comfortable, filled with toys and games and soft lighting. She talked to Lucas for almost an hour while I sat in the waiting room, reading the same magazine page over and over. "He's doing remarkably well considering," Dr. Chen told me afterward. "Children are often more resilient than we give them credit for, but he'll need time to process this, and there may be some lingering anxiety around sleepovers and being away from you." She gave me a list of warning signs to watch for: changes in appetite, increased clinginess, regression in behavior, problems at school. Most of it felt obvious, but it helped to have someone professional telling me what was normal and what wasn't. "What about my guilt?" I asked her. "I keep replaying that night, thinking about how I could have prevented this. Parents often blame themselves when their children are hurt," she said gently. "But you responded exactly right when Lucas called you. You believed him, you took action immediately, and you got him to safety. That's what good parents do." I wanted to believe her, but the voice in my head kept saying I should have prevented it from happening in the first place. That night, as I was tucking Lucas into my bed again, he looked up at me with those big brown eyes that still looked a little too serious for a 10-year-old. "Mom, I'm sorry I wanted to go to that sleepover," he said quietly. My heart broke a little. "Oh, baby, you have nothing to be sorry for. Nothing that happened was your fault. You wanted to have fun with your friend, and that's perfectly normal. But if I hadn't wanted to go, then those teenagers still would have been drinking and being mean to Matthew. You didn't cause this, Lucas. Bad people made bad choices, and that's not on you." I hoped he believed me, because I was still working on believing it myself. It took about 3 months before Lucas felt comfortable sleeping in his own bed again. Even then, he'd sometimes appear in my doorway at midnight, claiming he'd heard a noise or had a bad dream. I never sent him away. Some nights we'd both end up on the couch, him curled up with his head on my lap while I dozed sitting up, one hand resting protectively on his shoulder. School was harder. Lucas went back after a week, but I could tell he was different, more cautious, more aware of social dynamics in ways that 10-year-olds shouldn't have to be. His teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, kept me updated on how he was doing. She said he was quieter than before, less likely to volunteer answers or joke around with classmates. "It's not that he seems depressed," she explained during a parent conference. "He just seems older somehow, more serious." Matthew came back to school around the same time, sporting a cast on his wrist that he claimed happened when he fell off his bike. His parents had been investigated by Child Protective Services, and while no formal charges were filed against them, Jake had been sentenced to community service and probation. The whole family seemed to be laying low, avoiding eye contact in the school pickup line. I tried not to hold grudges, but it was hard. Every time I saw Sarah at school events, I remembered her reassuring smile when she told me everything would be fine. Part of me understood that she couldn't have predicted what happened, but another part of me wondered how well she really knew her own kids. The first time Lucas asked to go to another sleepover, my immediate instinct was to say no. It was at his cousin Emma's house, my sister's daughter, and I'd known my sister's family my whole life. If anywhere was safe, it was there. "Can I go to Emma's slumber party next weekend?" he asked casually one evening while we were doing dishes. My hands tightened on the plate I was washing. "I don't know, sweetie. Don't you think you might get nervous being away from home overnight?" "Maybe a little," he admitted. "But Emma's different, and Aunt Lisa would never let anything bad happen." He was right, of course. My sister would probably call me every hour just to check in, but the thought of Lucas sleeping somewhere else still made my chest feel tight. "We'll see," I said, which was parent speak for, "Probably not, but I don't want to argue about it right now." But that night, I realized I was letting fear make decisions for both of us. Lucas needed to rebuild his confidence, needed to know that the world wasn't full of danger around every corner, and I needed to learn the difference between reasonable caution and paralyzing anxiety. So I called my sister. "If Lucas comes to Emma's party, would you mind if I checked in a few times?" "Are you kidding?" she laughed. "I was planning to text you updates every hour whether you asked for them or not. And if he gets uncomfortable at all, I'll bring him home myself." The night of the party, I drove Lucas to my sister's house and walked him to the door instead of just dropping him off. I hugged him goodbye and reminded him to call if he needed anything. "I will, Mom, but I think I'll be okay." I called 3 times that night, and my sister patiently answered every call, assuring me that Lucas was having fun, that all the kids were behaving, that she and her husband were both home and staying alert. "He's doing great," she told me during the last call. "He and Emma are teaching the other kids some card game and laughing their heads off." Lucas came home the next morning tired but happy, full of stories about staying up too late and eating too much pizza. It felt like a small victory for both of us. But I was different now too, more willing to ask questions, less worried about seeming overprotective. When other parents invited Lucas to parties or events, I asked who would be supervising, whether other adults would be present, what the plans were. Some people probably thought I was paranoid, but I didn't care anymore. I'd learned that the uncomfortable feeling I'd had that first night wasn't just random anxiety. It was my instincts trying to tell me something important. Maybe I hadn't been able to predict exactly what would happen, but some part of me had sensed that the situation wasn't as safe as it appeared. Now I listen to that voice. When something feels off, I pay attention. When I meet new parents, I ask more questions and take more time to get to know them before trusting them with my son. I'm not afraid to be the mom who wants phone numbers and emergency contacts and detailed plans. Lucas is doing well now. He still has occasional nightmares, but they're less frequent. He's made new friends at school and regained most of his old confidence. He even jokes sometimes about being the kid who knows how to handle emergencies, though I suspect that bravado covers up some lingering anxiety. We're both different people than we were before that night. More careful, maybe, but also stronger. I know now that I can trust myself to protect my son, even when it means making unpopular decisions. And Lucas knows that no matter where he is or what happens, he can call me, and I'll move heaven and earth to get to him. Sometimes that's all the safety you can really promise your kids. Not that nothing bad will ever happen, but that when it does, you'll be there to help them through it. And that when your gut tells you something isn't right, you'll listen.